I should have refused the assignment the moment they mentioned the winter wing. 23 years working as an estate manager for America's wealthiest families, and I had learned to recognize certain warning signs in their voices. The hesitation before explaining details. The way they avoided eye contact when discussing specific areas of their properties. Mrs. Hartwell possessed both tells when she called me that November afternoon in 2014. The Hartwell estate in Aspen sprawled across 47 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness, a monument to old mining money that had evolved into tech billions. 3 generations of Hartwells had expanded the main residence until it resembled less a home than a luxury resort. Yet for all its opulence, heated marble floors, original Monet paintings, a wine cellar worth more than most suburban houses, the winter wing remained untouched. Sealed. Forgotten by design. Mrs. Hartwell explained the situation with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The family would spend the holidays in Switzerland. The main house required routine maintenance. Simple enough work for someone of my experience. Then came the catch, delivered with that particular hesitation I had learned to fear. The winter wing needed inspection. After 10 years of deliberate neglect, moisture damage was becoming a concern. Insurance required documentation. I would be the first person to enter those rooms since 2004. She offered double my usual rate without my asking. Another warning sign I chose to ignore. The drive from Denver took 3 hours through increasingly treacherous mountain roads. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, blanketing the estate in crystalline silence that seemed to muffle even my footsteps. The main house loomed against the winter sky like something carved from the mountain itself. Massive timber beams, walls of native stone, windows that reflected the surrounding peaks with mirror-like precision. I had seen photographs, but photographs never captured the weight of a place like this. The way it seemed to press against your chest before you even stepped inside. My breath formed clouds in the thin mountain air as I retrieved my equipment from the Range Rover. Digital cameras, moisture meters, clipboards thick with insurance forms, the mundane tools of a mundane job. Nothing about this felt mundane. The caretaker, an elderly man named Thomas who had worked for the Hartwells since the 1980s, met me at the main entrance. His weathered face carried the kind of deep lines that spoke of decades spent squinting against alpine sun and wind. He handed me the keys with what I would later recognize as relief. "Winter wings through the east corridor," he said, pointing toward a hallway that disappeared into shadows. "Haven't been in there myself since they sealed it up." Mrs. Hartwell was real specific about that. He paused, glancing toward the east wing as if expecting something to emerge from its depths. "Funny thing, though," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "Been seeing lights sometimes. At night. Moving around up there in those rooms." I assured him it was probably electrical issues. Old wiring, power surges. The kind of rational explanation that sounds convincing in daylight. The footprints in the snow outside the winter wing windows suggested otherwise. The footprints circled the winter wing's exterior like a meditation path worn into fresh powder. Single file, deliberately spaced, each impression crisp enough to have been made within hours of my arrival. They began at the main building's northeast corner, traced the wing's perimeter twice, then simply stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall. I knelt beside the clearest print, my breath visible in the December air. Adult-sized, boot treads still sharp in the snow. The spacing suggested someone walking slowly, purposefully. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. Thomas appeared at my shoulder with the silent approach of a man accustomed to moving through wealthy households without disturbing their occupants. "Told you there was something," he said, studying the tracks with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades reading the mountain's moods. "Been finding these every few days since the first snow. Always the same pattern. Always disappearing at that wall." I followed the prints to their terminus. The winter wing's foundation rose seamlessly from the ground, native stone fitted so precisely that mortar lines were barely visible. No door. No window. No architectural feature that would explain why someone would walk here, much less how they might have vanished. Could be someone from town, I suggested. Kids, maybe? Trespassing. Thomas shook his head. Been watching this place for 34 years. Kids don't climb 2 miles through wilderness just to walk in circles. And they sure don't walk through walls. He handed me a brass key, its weight substantial in my palm. Winterwing's main entrance is inside. East corridor, last door on the right. Lock's been sealed since 2004. The east corridor stretched ahead like a throat waiting to swallow light. Hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting, their surface polished to mirror brightness. Oil paintings lined the walls, Hartwell ancestors rendered in oils and judgment, their eyes tracking my progress with painted disapproval. The temperature dropped noticeably as I approached the corridor's end, my breath beginning to miss despite the main house's heating system. The winter wing's door stood apart from the refined elegance surrounding it. Heavy oak, iron hinges black with age, a lock mechanism that belonged to an earlier century. Red wax seal covered the keyhole and handle, stamped with the Hartwell family crest, a mountain peak surrounded by mining tools. The seal had been broken recently. Cleanly. Deliberately. I photographed the damaged wax before inserting the brass key. The lock turned with surprising ease, as if it had been opened regularly despite its decade of supposed disuse. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a staircase that climbed into absolute darkness. Cold air rushed from the winter wing's depths, carrying scents that had no business existing in a sealed space. Pine needles. Fresh snow. Something else underneath, metallic and sharp, like pennies left in winter rain. My flashlight beam climbed the stairs ahead of me, illuminating walls covered in family photographs. Dozens of them. Hartwell's spanning generations, arranged chronologically from the bottom step upward. The oldest images showed stern-faced miners clutching pickaxes and fortune. More recent photographs captured tech moguls and society wives, their smiles as polished as their reputations. Halfway up the staircase, the photographs stopped abruptly. The remaining walls stood bare, as if someone had removed specific images and left the rest untouched. The winter wing's second floor opened into a reception area that time had preserved like an insect in amber. Persian rugs covered hardwood floors worn smooth by generations of Hartwell feet. Antique furniture arranged in conversation groupings suggested rooms designed for intimate gatherings. Everything remained exactly as it had been left, except for the thin layer of dust that should have accumulated over 10 years of abandonment. The rooms were spotless. My footsteps echoed differently here, as if the winter wing possessed acoustic properties that defied the main house's architectural logic. Sound seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should allow, creating an impression of whispered conversations just beyond hearing. I began my inspection in the eastern bedroom, clipboard in one hand, moisture meter in the other. The room's windows faced the mountain peaks, offering a view that real estate agents would describe as breathtaking. Today, thick clouds obscured the summits, creating a gray wall that pressed against the glass like something seeking entry. The moisture readings were perfect. No water damage. No signs of structural compromise. The winter wing had weathered its decade of neglect without suffering the deterioration that justified my presence here. A child's bedroom occupied the wing's northeast corner. Single bed with pristine white linens. Bookshelf lined with volumes that hadn't been touched in years. Toys arranged with museum-like precision on window shelves. A rocking horse positioned near the bed, its painted eyes reflecting my flashlight beam with unsettling intensity. The child's photographs had been removed from their frames. Every single one. Empty silver frames stood on the dresser like monuments to someone who had been systematically erased from family history. I found the letters in the child's desk drawer, tied with blue ribbon that had faded to gray. 47 envelopes, each addressed in a woman's careful handwriting to my dearest son. The postmarks spanned 2 decades, ending abruptly in December of 2003. The return address listed a psychiatric facility in Denver. The first letter, dated January of 1984, began with an apology that would echo through every subsequent page. "I know you cannot understand why Mommy had to go away." Margaret Hartwell had been institutionalized following what family records diplomatically termed a nervous collapse. The letters revealed a different story. A mother's desperate attempt to maintain connection with a son who grew up believing she had abandoned him. Love letters written to someone who would never receive them, stored in a room that had been sealed to preserve not memories, but their absence. Each letter contained the same closing promise: "One day, when you are old enough to understand, I will come back to you." Margaret Hartwell had died in the psychiatric facility in December of 2003, 1 month before the Winter Wing was sealed. The last letter remained unopened in its envelope, as if someone had decided that certain communications were too dangerous to receive, even posthumously. I photographed the letters with hands that trembled slightly in the wing's persistent cold. Professional documentation of family secrets that explained nothing about the footprints in the snow or the photographs that had walked away from their frames on their own. Outside the window, fresh snow began to fall, erasing the mysterious tracks that had led me here. The snow fell heavier now, transforming the mountain landscape into something from a fairy tale written by someone who understood that the most beautiful stories often carried the darkest truths. I moved through the Winter Wing's remaining rooms with growing unease, my moisture readings consistently perfect, my photographs documenting a preservation that defied rational explanation. The master bedroom occupied the wing's western corner. Here, finally, I found evidence of the decay I had been hired to document. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like brown flowers, originating from a source I could not identify. The damage was recent, weeks old at most, yet the room had supposedly remained sealed and unoccupied for over a decade. More disturbing were the personal effects arranged on the dresser. A man's watch, stopped at 11:47. Reading glasses folded beside a leather-bound journal. A silver picture frame containing a photograph that should not have existed, Margaret Hartwell, young and radiant, holding a boy of perhaps 8 years old. Both figures smiled at the camera with the unconscious joy of people who believed their happiness was permanent. The photograph was dated December of 2003, impossible, since Margaret had died in institutional care that same month, and the boy would have been 20 years old by then. I lifted the frame with hands that had grown steady through years of handling other families' secrets. The photograph felt warm against my fingertips, as if it had been recently held. On the reverse side, someone had written in careful script, "For David, my eternal boy. Love never dies, it only waits." The footsteps in the hallway behind me were soft but unmistakably real. I turned toward the doorway with the measured calm that 23 years of professional service had taught me. Wealthy families maintain secrets that require delicate handling. Unexpected encounters in sealed wings of family estates called for discretion above all else. The hallway stood empty. My flashlight beam swept across hardwood floors that reflected its light like still water. The footsteps had possessed weight, purpose, the deliberate cadence of someone who knew these rooms intimately. Yet no one stood in the corridor's shadows, no retreating figure disappeared around distant corners. I checked my watch. 3:27 in the afternoon. The Winter Wing's windows showed only gray sky and falling snow, but the light felt wrong, too dim for mid-afternoon, too diffuse for natural illumination. It was the kind of light that preceded mountain storms, when day and night blurred into something that belonged to either. A door at the corridor's far end stood ajar. I was certain it had been closed during my initial survey. The gap measured perhaps 6 inches, revealing only darkness beyond. I approached with professional caution, clipboard in hand like a shield against whatever waited in rooms that had been sealed for legitimate reasons. The nameplate beside the door read David in brass letters that had been polished recently. The metal gleamed with the kind of attention that suggested regular care, though Thomas had assured me that no one entered the winter wing. Ever. Inside, I found a grown man's office arranged like a shrine to interrupted childhood. Adult furniture surrounded by toys that had never aged. Photographs of the same boy at different stages, but the ages were wrong. The photographs covered every available surface in David's office. School pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, an entire childhood documented with obsessive thoroughness. Yet the dates told an impossible story. Images supposedly captured in 1995 showed a boy who appeared 8 years old. Photographs dated 2003 featured the same child, unchanged by 8 years that should have transformed him into a teenager. David Hartwell, according to family records I had reviewed during my drive from Denver, had been born in 1975. He should have been approaching 40 when these photographs were taken. Instead, the images suggested someone who had stopped aging at 8 years old, preserved in eternal boyhood like a fairy tale curse made manifest. The desk drawers contained appointment cards for psychiatric evaluations spanning 20 years. David had been seeing the same Denver facility that had housed his mother. The assessment reports painted a portrait of profound psychological arrest, a man whose mind had never progressed beyond the trauma of maternal abandonment, whose reality remained anchored in the moment his mother vanished from his life. The final report, dated November of 2004, recommended indefinite residential care. David Hartwell had been committed to the same institution where his mother died, 1 month after the winter wing was sealed. I photographed the documents with mounting understanding. The winter wing was not merely abandoned. It was a mausoleum for a family destroyed by silence, guilt, and the terrible weight of love that had nowhere to go. Outside, the footsteps in the snow had resumed their circular path, walking through walls that could not contain what lived here now. The temperature in David's office dropped as I photographed the psychiatric records. My breath began forming clouds despite the winter wing-sealed environment, each exhalation hanging in air that seemed reluctant to circulate. The photographs on the desk reflected my flashlight beam differently now, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by invisible stones. I had documented enough family tragedies to recognize the pattern emerging from these walls. Maternal abandonment. Psychological fracture. A child's mind protecting itself by refusing to grow beyond the moment when safety disappeared. David Hartwell had been 8 years old when his mother was institutionalized. His consciousness had remained 8 years old for the next 30 years. The office's bookshelf contained volumes that reinforced this arrested development. Children's stories mixed with psychiatric textbooks. Picture books about mothers who always came home beside clinical studies of dissociative disorders. Everything arranged with the careful precision of someone maintaining a world that existed outside normal time. Behind the desk, a door marked private stood slightly open. Cold air flowed from the gap like breath from lungs that had been holding it too long. My professional instincts suggested that some doors were better left unopened, but my assignment required complete documentation of the winter wing's condition. The room beyond contained what I can only describe as a nursery designed for someone who would never outgrow it. Adult-size furniture scaled to accommodate a grown man's body while maintaining a child's aesthetic. Rocking chair. Changing table. Crib enlarged to accommodate someone who measured 6 feet tall but whose mind remained forever 8 years old. Fresh footprints crossed the nursery floor, leading to a window that overlooked the mountain peaks. The window stood open despite the December cold, its frame pushed outward into the storm that had transformed afternoon into premature twilight. Snow gathered on the nursery's windowsill, creating small drifts that should have melted immediately in the room's heated environment. Instead, the snow remained crystalline and untouched, as if the normal laws of temperature had been suspended within these walls. I approached the window with growing certainty that I was documenting something far beyond moisture damage and structural decay. The footprints in the nursery's carpet were adult-sized but spaced like a child's steps, small, hesitant, as if someone was learning to walk in a body that no longer matched their mental age. Outside, the mysterious tracks in the snow had multiplied. What began as a single path now resembled a gathering place, dozens of circular routes converging beneath the nursery window. The pattern suggested movement that had continued for hours, perhaps days, as if something had been walking these paths since the moment I arrived at the estate. Through the falling snow, I glimpsed a figure standing among the mountain pines. Adult height, but posture uncertain, head tilted with childlike curiosity. The distance and weather made identification impossible, yet something about the silhouette struck me as profoundly familiar. I had seen that exact stance captured in the photographs that covered David's office, a boy frozen in eternal youth, studying the world with permanent confusion. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or farewell, then stepped backward into the tree line and vanished as if the forest had simply absorbed another shadow. My camera captured only falling snow and empty wilderness. I sealed the winter wing at sunset, though the storm clouds had transformed the mountain afternoon into something that resembled midnight. Thomas waited in the main house's kitchen, coffee growing cold in his weathered hands, eyes fixed on the windows that faced the sealed wing. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I delivered my report with professional neutrality. No structural damage requiring immediate attention. Minimal moisture concerns. The winter wing could remain sealed indefinitely without compromising the main estate's integrity. Standard insurance documentation complete. Thomas nodded as if he had expected nothing else. "Mrs. Hartwell called while you were working," he said. "Wants to know if you found anything unusual." I considered the photographs of impossible dates, the psychiatric records that documented a family's systematic destruction, the footprints that circled walls like prayers worn into snow. The figure in the forest who moved like a child trapped in an adult's body, walking the boundary between worlds that rational minds insisted remained separate. Nothing unusual, I told him, which was perhaps the most truthful lie I had ever spoken. Families like the Hartwells paid for discretion above all else. Some secrets were too dangerous to document, even when they walked through walls and left tracks in winter snow. The drive down the mountain took longer than expected. In my rearview mirror, lights moved through the winter wing's windows, warm, steady illumination that suggested someone had finally come home to rooms that had been waiting 10 years for their return. I never worked for the Hartwell family again.